No respect for my wife, family, or anybody, my friends, because, I was a better boxer than them.
Larry Holmes was a master of the jab and a king who never cared for the spotlight games. But behind his cool exterior, the Easton Assassin didn't forget the fighters who crossed the line. In this video, we're uncovering the names Holmes couldn't hide his disdain for. From dirty tactics to bitter rivalries, these are the boxers who made it onto Larry Holmes's ultimate hate list. Before we get to the names, let's take a step back and see how these grudges even started. Because with Larry Holmes, bad blood doesn't come out of nowhere. It always has a buildup, and once it started, it was almost impossible to cool down. The making of a championship grudge. Larry Holmes didn't walk into the heavyweight scene looking for attention. He earned it the old-fashioned way by beating everyone in front of him. One after another, they came at him, and one after another, they fell. By the time he reached 48 wins without a single loss, people had no choice but to acknowledge him. He was called the Easton Assassin, not because it sounded cool, but because it was true. His jab was sharp, fast, and unforgiving. Holmes also was smart. He had one of the highest ring intelligence quotients heavyweight boxing ever saw. He studied opponents like a chess player preparing a final match. If you were across the ring from him, you felt it over and over, until your own game plan crumbled. Holmes wasn't merely about power punches that made highlight reels. He could break you down, take away your rhythm, and own the pace. People often called him cocky, implying that he was so full of himself. In reality, Holmes knew how good he was. After toppling legend after legend, who could really stand in his way? He earned every ounce of that confidence. The problem was, Holmes always felt like the respect didn't come fast enough. He'd win titles, defend them, beat fan favorites, yet somehow he was still fighting for credit. For Holmes, being a champion wasn't only about defending a belt, it was about defending his name also. And when he felt someone crossed a line, whether through words or actions, that fight became personal. He wasn't the type to brush it off after the fight was over. He remembered every jab in the press conferences, every smirk, and every headline that tried to downplay his work in the ring. The thing is, hate in boxing isn't always about the punches. Sometimes it's about the space between them, the tension, the pride, and the feeling that someone is stepping into your territory uninvited. Holmes could take a punch. That was never the issue. What really got under his skin was disrespect. That's what turned a fight into a grudge. And once Holmes had a grudge, it didn't fade. Because years later, he still remembers who slighted him. Every jab he threw had a story behind it. Every tough fight had layers you didn't see on the surface. And when he mentioned names of fighters he truly disliked, it wasn't random. Those names came with history. Some rivalries were about boxing, and others were deeper and much more personal. Now that we know how Larry Holmes carried his grudges, it's time to reveal the first name on his list. And according to him, this one was really a tough opponent. Who was it? When you talk about the names that really tested Holmes, Ken Norton always comes up first. You might probably think it's because of some trash talk or bad blood in the media. But no. This one was built in a fight that nearly emptied everything Holmes had. If you know anything about heavyweight history, there is no way you wouldn't have heard about their 1978 title fight. That particularly night was a full-blown war. Holmes and Norton stepped into the ring for the WBC heavyweight title. Nobody expected what was about to happen. For 15 rounds, they went at each other with no breaks, no backing up, and no holding back. It was more like each round was a fight for survival. Every time Holmes would land that sharp jab, Norton would take it and keep moving forward. Every time Norton connected, Holmes would answer right back. None of these men wanted to give up. Years later, Holmes didn't hesitate to call that night the hardest fight of his life. Coming from a guy who fought through every era's biggest names, this says a lot. Holmes even admitted Norton hit him more times in that fight than anyone else ever had. And yet, when the final bell rang, Holmes was the one standing with his hand raised. The judges scored it 143 to 142. That's how close it was. But here's where the grudge starts to simmer. Holmes had been chasing respect for years, and this fight was supposed to be his moment. Yet even after going through that war with Norton, there were still people doubting if Holmes truly deserved the belt. Some felt Norton should have won. Others said Holmes got lucky, and that made him feel some type of way. You see, Holmes respected Norton's toughness, no doubt. He once said Norton was the kind of fighter who didn't give 1 inch. Norton didn't back off, neither did he give Holmes the breathing room he was used to controlling. For a guy who built his career on dictating pace, Norton was a problem Holmes couldn't shake off. Now, was it hate? Maybe not the kind of hate you shout about. However, for Holmes, it was different. It was almost as if he admired Norton for being that relentless, but also couldn't stand him for forcing a war when Holmes wanted a clean win. That night, Norton wasn't an opponent. He was an obstacle Holmes had to crash through. And the dents from that crash didn't go away easily. It was the kind of rivalry that leaves a permanent scar, even after the gloves come off. Now, the story gets even more intense from here, because while Norton tested Holmes in the ring, the next name on Holmes's list tested his patience in a way that was downright personal. The circus outside the ring. We've looked at one rival built in the ring, but this next one is different. Their tension wasn't just in the ring, it was everywhere around it, and this time, it was wrapped in something even uglier. Gerry Cooney's name always comes up when you talk about Larry Holmes, though he wasn't on Holmes's official hate list. Their relationship carried a storm of pressure, resentment, and racial undertones that burned as fiercely as any fight. In 1982, Holmes was the heavyweight champion, and he always defended his title again and again. Yet somehow, all eyes were on the man across from him, Gerry Cooney. Now, Cooney was no slouch. He had power, a strong left hook, and a solid record. But with the way the media sold this fight, you'd think Cooney was sent to save the sport. They called him the Great White Hope, and that tag came with all the baggage you'd expect. The circus started long before the opening bell. Don King, always the showman, stirred the pot like never before. He hyped the fight as a cultural event, but it was more like a racial showdown, and the press followed suit. Suddenly, this wasn't about two fighters anymore. It became a racial showdown, and Cooney was given the spotlight. He appeared on magazine covers, was treated like the next big thing, and even had a direct phone line set up in his dressing room for President Reagan to call if he won. On the other hand, Holmes didn't get any of that. He was the defending champion, yet he was made to feel like an outsider. Holmes didn't hide his frustration or keep quiet about it. He flat out told reporters, if Cooney wasn't white, he wouldn't be getting the same purse. For him, the fight wasn't about proving who was better. He had done that already. It was about fighting for the respect he felt had been stolen from him. What made it worse was how the fight itself was packaged. During the introductions, Cooney's name was announced second, which traditionally is reserved for the champion. That was a slap in the face of Holmes, and he didn't take it lightly. He saw it as a clear sign that the machine behind Cooney didn't care about tradition or merit. All they cared about was the narrative. When the fight finally happened, it was more than personal. Holmes dropped Cooney in the second round, but Cooney didn't fold. He fired back with his dangerous left hook, landing clean shots. Still, Holmes controlled the tempo. Cooney's desperation started to show as he landed low blows, costing him points. By the 13th round, Holmes had Cooney pinned. Cooney's corner saw the writing on the wall and threw in the towel. After the fight, Holmes didn't hold back his thoughts. He joked and said, "Cooney had been in my pants so often I thought he wanted to marry me." It was really a sharp and funny line, but deep down, Holmes had felt smothered by Cooney's media presence. That fight had become bigger than boxing. It was a social spectacle, and Holmes hated every bit of that. What's interesting is that Holmes and Cooney eventually became friends. Holmes always made it clear that Cooney himself wasn't the problem. Jerry had nothing to do with all that rubbish. "He's a nice guy," Holmes once said. Then he jokingly added, "But if he gets out of line, I may have to whip his ass." For Holmes, the resentment didn't come from the ring. It was built in press conferences, media tours, and promotional stunts that made him feel like his years of work didn't matter. Cooney became the face of that disrespect, whether he wanted it or not. So, while Holmes might not have truly hated Cooney, the fight symbolized everything Holmes despised about how boxing treated him. It was about the feeling that no matter how many times he proved himself, the world still wanted someone else to take his place. Some fights are about titles, while others are about pride. What happens when the person across the ring isn't just an opponent, but someone you once looked up to? The next name wasn't a rivalry Holmes wanted. It was a betrayal he never forgot. Out of all the names tied to Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali stands apart because this wasn't a fight that should have happened. Well, at least not in Holmes's heart. The thing is, Ali wasn't a rival at all. He was the man Holmes had admired, learned from, and in many ways owed his boxing identity to. For years, Holmes worked as Ali's sparring partner. Day after day, he stood in front of the greatest, picking up lessons you couldn't get from any coach. Holmes learned how to throw a jab with rhythm, how to control a ring, and how to build the kind of confidence that could carry a fighter through any war. However, he never thought it would lead to a night where he'd have to fight the man for real. But that's exactly what happened. In 1980, the fight was set to take place at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Holmes was 35-0, the undisputed WBC heavyweight champion. And Ali was way past his prime. His body showed signs of aging, and his speech had softened. Still, the promoters packaged it as a blockbuster. They called it a passing of the torch, but deep down, Holmes knew what it really was. For Ali, it was a big payday. But to Holmes, it was a chance to finally step out of Ali's shadow, even if it meant fighting a version of Ali that shouldn't have been in that ring. From the opening bell, Holmes controlled everything. His jab was sharp, and he moved flawlessly. Yet, he didn't go immediately for the kill. He jabbed Ali at will, picked his shots carefully, almost as if he was holding back out of respect. He didn't want to hurt him, but boxing isn't a sport where you can afford to go soft. By the 9th round, it was clear the fight had turned into something painful. Holmes landed a hard shot to Ali's kidneys, and Ali's body reacted to that immediately. He buckled slightly, slumped into the ropes, trying to cover up. He didn't go down to the canvas, but you could see his legs were barely holding him up. Holmes himself pleaded with the referee to stop the fight earlier, fearing Ali's condition, but the referee insisted that he continued boxing. Eventually, after the 10th round, Ali's trainer Angelo Dundee stopped the fight, making it the only time Ali ever lost by stoppage. When Holmes was declared the winner, he was visibly emotional. You could see the tears in his eyes. He crossed the ring and embraced Muhammad Ali, kissing him on the cheek, and he said, "I love you. I really respect you. I hope we'll always be friends. Your house or my house. If you ever need me for anything, just call and I'll be there." You see, it wasn't about Ali losing his legend status. Holmes cried because he felt like he had taken part in tearing it down. The victory didn't feel like a career-defining moment. It felt like betrayal. Holmes said later, "I don't regret fighting Muhammad Ali in Las Vegas. I had to get out of his shadow and get paid. Ali was a friend in my eyes. I knew Ali couldn't beat me. When I fought Ali, it was like me going to the store and getting whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it. That's what I did. anything I wanted to in the ring. And yet, the pain of that night lingered for years. Many fans remember this as the saddest moment in boxing history. But what stung the most wasn't the fight. It was how the world reacted. The media wanted a story where Ali would defy time and reclaim glory. Instead, Holmes had to be the man who reminded the world that even legends age. He didn't hate Ali, he just hated the perception. Fans booed him for winning. The press didn't celebrate his win. Instead, they painted him as the bad guy, even though he was the one carrying the sport forward. He was seen as the man who punished a fading icon. Even though that hurts, Holmes understood that to cement his place in history, he had to step out of Ali's shadow. But stepping out meant beating the man who had given him everything. Yet, he never fully embraced the win. It felt more like a burden than a triumph. Every champion eventually meets the next era. For Holmes, that moment came with a fighter who didn't care about history or respect. The final torch passer. By the time Larry Holmes stepped out of the ring after fighting Muhammad Ali, he probably thought the hardest fights of his life were behind him. He had gone toe-to-toe with legends, battled through media storms, and carried the heavyweight title on his shoulders for years. But the sport had one more cruel twist and unfinished business waiting for him, and it was Mike Tyson. In 1988, Holmes came out of retirement, and many wondered why. He was financially secure, had a strong legacy, and no longer had anything to prove. But boxing isn't always about logic. Sometimes the business side calls louder than the heart, and Holmes was offered a big payday to face Tyson. The offer sounded tempting, but Holmes would later admit that something about it didn't sit right. He felt like he was being lined up as Tyson's next highlight reel. As at that time, Mike Tyson wasn't just the heavyweight champion, he was a force of nature. At 21, he had taken the boxing world by storm, knocking out everyone who stepped in his way. When it was time for the fight at the Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, Holmes tried to hold his ground. He moved with the rhythm of a veteran, but Tyson wasn't there to box. He was there to destroy. Holmes's jab, the same jab that had carried him through years of title defenses, couldn't keep Tyson off him. Tyson's punches came in fast, heavy, and relentless. By round 4, Holmes was knocked down 3 times. The third knockdown sealed it. The referee had no choice but to call it. That fight would go down as the only time Holmes was ever knocked out in his career. After the fight, Holmes felt like the sport had used him one final time and took the loss personally. He wasn't angry because he got beaten. He was angry because of how it all unfolded. He felt like the sport had cornered him into a fight he never should have taken. And when the dust settled, Holmes didn't hold back. He called Tyson a dirty fighter, accusing him of throwing elbows, using his head, and landing punches after the bell. Holmes once said, "I didn't see class. I saw a guy who throws elbows, hits after the bell, and doesn't care." To Holmes, Tyson represented everything wrong with the new era of boxing. Tyson wasn't about skillful chess matches in the ring. He was about raw power and intimidation. Holmes saw himself as a craftsman and a technician, while Tyson, on the other hand, was the wrecking ball that didn't care about tradition or respect. The intriguing part is that Tyson had his own reasons for fighting Holmes. He said he was fighting for Muhammad Ali's honor, and Holmes had hurt his hero when they fought years earlier. For Holmes, that was nonsense. He wasn't Ali's enemy. He was his friend and his sparring partner. But the narrative had already been written, and Holmes found himself walking into a fight that felt more personal for Tyson than it did for him. Larry Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been beaten. He regretted coming back. He regretted believing the money was worth it. Even years later, the sting from that night never fully left him. "Mike knocked the shit out of me. He hit me so hard I went, woo, and he beat me. It was embarrassing. I remember the right hand he hit me with. I thought at the time he should be locked up because of the power, and he kept on coming, growling like Joe Frazier." It wasn't hate in the personal sense, but Holmes carried a lasting resentment for how the sport and Tyson treated him on that stage. Holmes's list didn't end with Tyson. Over the years, one more name found its way into his crosshairs. Who could that be? Let's find out. Not every rivalry in Larry Holmes's career was built on bad blood. Some were built on survival. And when it came to Ernie Shavers, Holmes didn't need to hate him. He just needed to survive him. Holmes often said Ernie Shavers was the hardest puncher he ever faced. With the way he described it, you could tell it wasn't a compliment thrown around lightly. He had sparred with Shavers before their official fights, so he knew what was coming. Still, no amount of sparring prepares you for a punch that could rearrange your thoughts. They fought twice, and Holmes outboxed him both times. The first was for the WBC title, a clear win for Holmes, and the second, that was a war. In the 7th round of their 1979 rematch, Shavers landed a right hand so clean, Holmes hit the canvas hard. Later, Holmes said that punch was the hardest he'd ever been hit. And coming from a guy who's been in there with Mike Tyson, that's saying a lot. Slowly, he got up. He pulled himself together and stopped Shavers in the 11th round. It was one of those moments that defined his legacy, not because he won, but because of what he endured to win. Even after all that, Holmes never had a bad word to say about Shavers. Shavers didn't stir Holmes's bitterness like others did. There was no disrespect between them, only a mutual understanding of what it meant to test each other in the ring. We've heard the names Larry Holmes called out, but is there a rival you believe deserved a place on his hate list? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share, and check out our channel for more updates.